Look around. Every day, someone you've never heard of becomes famous. A random musician uploads one song, a creator posts one video, an entrepreneur shares one idea. A few months later, millions of people know their name. Then you look at yourself. Maybe you're smarter. Maybe you've spent years learning. Maybe you've worked harder than they ever did. So why does nobody know you? Most people answer that question with one word: luck. They got lucky. It's comforting, because if success is random, then failure isn't your fault. But here's the problem. Luck can make someone famous. It almost never keeps them famous. If popularity were just luck, the same people wouldn't stay at the top for years. Yet they do. So something else must be happening. Most people completely misunderstand what popularity actually is. They think it's a reward, a prize for talent, a trophy for hard work. It isn't. Popularity is attention, and attention follows rules that have almost nothing to do with fairness. The internet doesn't wake up every morning asking, "Who deserves success today?" It asks a much simpler question: what deserves attention? Those are two completely different questions. You can spend 3 years creating the greatest video nobody has ever seen, and someone else can film a 30-second clip on their phone and reach 10 million people. Not because they're better, because they won the battle for attention. That sounds unfair, because it is. Attention has never been distributed fairly. It never will be. Imagine building the greatest restaurant on earth. The food is perfect. The chefs are world-class. Every review would be 5 stars. There's just one problem. You built it in the middle of a desert. No roads, no signs, no maps. Nobody knows it exists. Would it succeed? Of course not. Not because the restaurant is bad, because invisible things don't get chosen. Most people are that restaurant. They're obsessed with becoming better, but they've forgotten to become visible. They spend months perfecting things that almost nobody will ever see. Another edit, another redesign, another rewrite, another excuse to delay publishing. Meanwhile, someone with half the talent has already uploaded 50 videos, and now people know their name. There's a brutal truth about the internet. It doesn't reward hidden potential. It rewards visible value, and those are not the same thing. Here's something even more uncomfortable. Being the best isn't enough, because before people can appreciate your work, they have to notice you. Think about the last 10 creators you subscribed to. Did you compare them to every other creator in the world before clicking subscribe? Of course not. You noticed them first. Then you decided whether they were worth following. Visibility always comes before credibility. Always. Most people try to reverse the order. They think, "I'll become incredible first, then people will find me." History says otherwise. The world is full of brilliant people nobody has ever heard of. Not because they lack talent, because talent hidden from the world changes nothing. Now here's where things become interesting. Look at the biggest creators, the biggest artists, the biggest entrepreneurs, the biggest personalities. They're completely different. Different backgrounds, different personalities, different appearances, different voices, different beliefs. But almost all of them have one thing in common. They're impossible to confuse with someone else. You can recognize them in seconds, not because they're perfect, because they're memorable. Most people make the opposite mistake. They try so hard to avoid criticism that they erase everything unique about themselves. They smooth every rough edge, hide every unusual opinion, copy whatever already works, speak exactly like everyone else, dress like everyone else, edit like everyone else, think like everyone else. Then they wonder why nobody remembers them. Here's the irony. The internet doesn't ignore you because you're different. It ignores you because you're forgettable. And those are two very different problems. Imagine someone removes the username from your content. No profile picture, no channel name, no logo. Could people still tell it was yours? If the answer is no, you don't have a visibility problem. You have an identity problem. Most people spend years trying to become the best. Very few spend time becoming recognizable. The second one matters first, because people can't remember perfection, but they always remember originality. And that's only the beginning. The biggest reason people stay invisible starts long before they ever hit publish. Before most people fail, they hesitate. Not because they aren't talented, not because they don't have ideas, because they're afraid of being seen. Think about that for a second. You want attention, but you're afraid of attracting attention. It's like wanting to become a singer while hoping nobody hears your voice. It doesn't make sense. Yet millions of people live exactly like that. They tell themselves they're waiting until they're better, waiting for the perfect camera, waiting for more confidence, waiting until life becomes less busy, waiting until the timing feels right. But waiting is often just fear wearing a more respectable outfit. There's a psychological concept called the spotlight effect. Researchers have found that people consistently overestimate how much others notice and remember their mistakes. We imagine everyone is watching us, judging us, laughing at us. The reality is almost disappointing. Most people are too busy worrying about themselves to spend much time thinking about you. The embarrassing post you can't stop thinking about? Everyone else forgot within hours. The awkward video you almost deleted? Most viewers never thought twice about it. The mistake that keeps you awake at night barely existed in anyone else's mind. Your brain puts you at the center of the story. Everyone else's brain does exactly the same thing. That's why so many dreams die before anyone even has a chance to reject them. People reject themselves first. Now imagine two creators. The first spends 6 months planning, learning, researching, buying equipment, watching tutorials, changing thumbnails, rewriting scripts. Everything looks productive, but nothing gets published. The second creator starts with an average camera, average editing, average confidence, nothing special. He uploads anyway. One video, then another, then another. A year later, guess who has improved more? Not because one person was naturally gifted, because feedback only exists after action. Confidence isn't something you collect before you begin. It's something you build because you began. That's one of the biggest lies people believe. I'll start when I feel confident. No, confidence is usually the receipt, not the payment. You earn it afterward. Here's another trap: perfection. It feels responsible, professional, disciplined. But most of the time, perfection is just procrastination with better branding. Think about how many creators spend hours adjusting tiny details, changing one transition, moving one sentence, testing 20 different fonts, tweaking colors no viewer will ever notice. It feels like progress. But there's one question nobody asks. What if you're optimizing something that almost nobody will ever watch? There's an economic idea called opportunity cost. Every hour you spend polishing one project is an hour you didn't spend creating the next one. Most successful creators understand something beginners don't. Nobody knows which piece of content will change everything. Not even the biggest YouTubers. Not even Hollywood studios. Not even billion-dollar companies. If they could predict hits with certainty, every movie would become a blockbuster. Every product would dominate the market. Every video would go viral. But that's not how reality works. Success isn't predictable. It's probabilistic. Every high-quality attempt increases your odds. One video might fail. The next one might get 10 times more views. Then the one after that changes your entire career. Not because it was perfect, because it reached the right people at the right moment. The internet doesn't reward perfect execution. It rewards repeated exposure to valuable ideas. And here's something fascinating. Psychologists call it the mere exposure effect. The more often people encounter something familiar, the more likely they are to develop a positive feeling toward it. That's why companies advertise constantly, not because they think you'll buy immediately, because familiarity creates trust. Creators often ignore this completely. They upload once, disappear for 3 months, come back, disappear again, then wonder why nobody remembers them. People can't remember someone they rarely see. You don't build recognition through one masterpiece. You build recognition through repeated contact. Think of your favorite musician. Were you obsessed after hearing one song? Maybe, but probably not. You heard another, then another, then another. At some point, they stopped being just another artist. They became your artist. The same thing happens with creators. Familiarity compounds, trust compounds, reputation compounds. Everything compounds. But only if you keep showing up. That's where most people quit. Not because they're incapable, because consistency is boring. Nobody applauds your 20th upload with 50 views. Nobody celebrates your 50th video with 200 views. The world only notices after the breakthrough. It rarely notices everything that created it, which is exactly why so many people believe success happens overnight. It almost never does. By the time everyone knows your name, you've usually spent years becoming the person they just discovered. And even if you accept all of this, there's still another mistake that quietly destroys almost every creator. Most people think they're creating content. They're actually creating information. And those two things are not the same. Information doesn't create followers. Feeling does. This is where most creators completely miss the point. They think success comes from being useful, so they try to pack as much information as possible into every video. More facts, more explanations, more depth, more effort. But attention doesn't work like that. People don't subscribe because you gave them everything you know. They subscribe because of how you made them feel while you were talking. Think about your own behavior. You don't rewatch videos because they contained perfect information. You rewatch them because they had a certain tone, a certain energy, a certain clarity, a certain feeling that stuck with you. Maybe it made you feel smarter, or calmer, or more motivated, or less alone. That feeling is the product. Information is just the packaging. This is why extremely simple content often outperforms highly detailed content. Not because simplicity is better, but because clarity survives attention spans. Complexity usually doesn't. The human brain is constantly filtering input. Most of what we see gets ignored within seconds. Not because it's bad, because attention is limited. And limited resources always create competition. So the question is not, how much can I explain? The real question is, how long can I hold attention before it breaks? That changes everything. Because now you're not just teaching, you're directing attention, you're guiding emotion, you're managing curiosity. There's a reason the best storytellers in the world don't reveal everything at once. They don't dump information. They pace it. They create tension. They delay resolution. Because attention is not given, it's earned moment by moment. And every moment you lose it, you may never get it back. Now here's something uncomfortable. Being correct is not enough. You can be 100% right and still be ignored. Meanwhile, someone less accurate, less knowledgeable, less experienced can build a massive audience. Why? Because communication beats expertise in public attention systems. That's not an opinion. That's observable everywhere online. The internet doesn't reward who knows the most. It rewards who gets understood the fastest. That's a completely different skill, and it explains a lot of frustration people feel. They assume, if I improve my knowledge, people will notice me. But knowledge alone doesn't spread. Clarity spreads. Emotion spreads. Relatability spreads. And above all, memorability spreads. That's why some creators repeat the same core idea for years. Not because they have nothing new to say, but because repetition builds recognition. Each repetition strengthens memory. Each exposure increases familiarity. Each familiar moment increases trust. Eventually, people stop thinking, "Who is this?" and start thinking, "I know this voice." That shift is everything. Now, there's another trap that looks completely logical on the surface: imitation. Most beginners try to copy successful creators. Same style, same tone, same editing, same structure, same jokes. It feels safe, because if it already worked once, it should work again, right? But audiences don't want duplicates. They already chose the original. So when they see a copy, they don't think, "This is better." They think, "This is unnecessary." And the result is invisibility. Because the internet doesn't reward similarity, it rewards distinction. But here's the subtle part. Most people misunderstand what being different means. It doesn't mean being extreme. It doesn't mean being loud. It doesn't mean being controversial. It means being identifiable. If you remove your name from your content and people can still recognize it as yours, then you've built something valuable. That identity is usually built from small things: the way you explain ideas, the rhythm of your speech, the types of examples you use, the way you think about problems, the emotional tone you default to. These are not tricks, they are patterns. And over time, patterns become identity. Most people never reach that stage because they quit too early. They upload a few times, get weak results, and assume the system is against them. But the system isn't rejecting them. It simply hasn't had enough time to notice them. The internet doesn't evaluate effort, it evaluates history. And history takes time to build. Which leads to the final mistake, the one that quietly ends more potential creators than anything else. They treat consistency like motivation, instead of treating it like infrastructure. Motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes without warning. One day you feel unstoppable. The next day, you don't want to do anything at all. If your entire creative output depends on motivation, your output will always be unstable. That's why most people stay stuck. They wait for the right mood to work. But professional creators don't operate on mood. They operate on structure, on systems, on something that works even when they don't feel like working. Because consistency is not an emotion. It's a design choice. And once you understand that, everything changes. You stop asking, "Do I feel like creating today?" and start asking, "What does my system require today?" This is the difference between people who try and people who build something over time. Now here's something most beginners completely misunderstand. They think popularity is the goal, but attention is extremely unstable. It can appear quickly and disappear even faster. One viral video can bring thousands of followers, but without structure behind it, those followers don't stay. That's why you see creators explode overnight and disappear just as fast. Because they optimized for attention, not retention. But real growth doesn't come from one moment. It comes from repeated trust. When people know what to expect from you, when they recognize your thinking, when they start coming back on purpose, that's when growth becomes stable. And this is where patience becomes important. Not passive patience, not waiting, but active patience. Continuing when results are not visible yet. Continuing when progress feels invisible. Continuing when nothing seems to be happening. Because that's exactly the phase where most people quit, right before things start to compound. And compounding is the most misunderstood force in online growth. Small actions don't look important in isolation. One video, one post, one idea, nothing special. But repeated over time, they build momentum. And momentum changes everything. At some point, you stop pushing. And things start moving because they are already moving. That's the shift most people never experience, because they stop before reaching it. Now let's correct another misconception. Popularity is not the finish line. It's not the reward for becoming good enough. It's a byproduct, a side effect of repeated value being noticed by enough people over time. And even then, it doesn't guarantee stability, because attention is not the same as trust. You can get attention without trust, but you cannot maintain attention without trust. That's why many people who go viral struggle afterward, because they were discovered, but not yet understood. Trust takes longer. It requires consistency. It requires honesty. It requires repetition of value over time. And this is why long-term creators almost always win against short-term spikes. Not because they are more talented, but because they are more predictable in a good way. People know what they stand for. They know what they deliver. They know what they will get when they click again. That predictability becomes comfort, and comfort becomes loyalty. Now there's one final idea that ties everything together. Most people ask the wrong question. They ask, "Why am I not popular yet?" But a better question is, if I continue for the next 5 years, what will inevitably happen? Because popularity is rarely a sudden event. It is usually the result of a long period where nothing seemed to happen, until suddenly, everything did. And from the outside, it looks like luck, but from the inside, it was repetition. Small decisions, made consistently, when no one was watching. And if there's one truth that survives all platforms, trends, and algorithms, it's this. The only people who never become visible are the ones who stop showing up. At some point, every creator faces the same quiet moment. Not a dramatic failure, not a public rejection, just silence. You upload something, and nothing happens. No reaction, no growth, no feedback that feels meaningful. And that silence is dangerous, because it slowly creates a story in your head. Maybe this isn't working. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe other people just have it. But silence is not a verdict. It's just delay. The internet does not respond in real time in the way people expect it to. It tests ideas slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. And most people misinterpret that delay as rejection. So they stop, right before anything could have started. This is the most common pattern in any creative space. Not lack of ability, not lack of intelligence, but premature conclusion. A decision made too early based on incomplete data. Now zoom out and look at the people who eventually become known. There's a pattern that repeats almost every time. They were not the most talented at the beginning. They were not the most prepared. They were not the most confident. They were simply the ones who didn't stop during the invisible phase. The phase where nothing seems to respond, where effort feels wasted, where improvement is happening but not visible yet. That phase is where most potential disappears. Not because people fail, but because they leave. And the truth is uncomfortable. The system doesn't care how much effort you already invested. It only responds to what you continue to invest. That's why starting matters less than continuing. Starting is easy. Everyone starts. Continuing is the filter. Now, if you remove everything emotional from the equation and just look at mechanics, there are only a few variables that actually matter over time. Number of attempts, clarity of message, ability to be recognized, consistency of presence. Everything else is secondary. Talent helps, luck helps, timing helps, but none of them can replace repetition. And repetition is the one variable you fully control. That's why the most reliable strategy for becoming visible has always been simple. Stay in the game long enough to be seen. Not once, not occasionally, but repeatedly, until recognition forms, until familiarity builds, until your presence becomes normal in someone's feed. That's when attention stops being random and starts becoming predictable. And once attention becomes predictable, everything else becomes possible. But there's one final misunderstanding that needs to be cleared. Many people believe the goal is to be liked by everyone. That is not only unrealistic, it's counterproductive. The more you try to appeal to everyone, the more diluted your message becomes. And diluted messages don't travel. Strong messages do. Clear perspectives do. Distinct voices do. Which means something important. If you are being completely neutral, universally acceptable, and impossible to disagree with, you are also likely impossible to remember. And in a world where millions of pieces of content compete every minute, being remembered is the real currency. Not being approved, not being universally liked, just being remembered. Because remembered content can be revisited, shared, followed, trusted, and built upon. So the real goal is not to eliminate criticism, it's to create clarity. Clarity about what you say, what you stand for, and what people can expect from you. Once that exists, everything becomes easier. Now zoom out completely. If you strip away all the strategies, all the psychology, all the technical details, there is only one dividing line between people who become visible and people who don't. One group keeps producing long enough for the world to notice them. The other stops before that moment arrives. That's it. Not talent, not perfection, not luck, just continuation. And maybe the most honest way to end this is with a simple idea. If you feel like nothing is happening right now, that feeling is not unusual. It is almost guaranteed, because visibility always lags behind effort. Always. But the gap between those two things is where everything important is built. And the only question that actually matters is not whether you are seen today, it's whether you will still be here when you finally are. Keep going, and thanks for watching.